It is 11 a.m. and welcome to our third virtual session with me, Amy Grosso, and Round Rock ISD Council of PTAs. Today we're going to talk about what are some productive ways we can talk to our kids about social media. Social media for a while has been a hot topic, but especially now considering almost our entire lives are now dependent on technology and social media for us to stay connected. As I said, I'm Dr. Amy Grosso. I am the Director of Behavioral Health Services for Round Rock ISD. To have a little fun, I put my Twitter profile for my introduction slide. If you use Twitter, you can follow me at Amy L. Grosso. I try to tweet a lot about a variety of different behavioral health issues, mental health issues for our kids, resources, so that you can be knowledgeable about a lot of these areas. My background is mental health counseling. I was a mental health counselor for a number of years, and even way back then, as social media was ramping up, with the work I did with many adolescents, saw the impact of social media on their lives. And also saw the way that adults and especially parents struggled to have meaningful conversations with their kids around this. So hopefully today you'll be able to get some good guidance and resources and tips. If during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the comment section, and then we should have time at the end to answer a few of those. So social media in itself, it's not bad or good. It's just a thing. It's a form of electronic communication. I think a lot of times, especially us as adults, when we hear the word social media, there's a lot of negative thoughts that come to our mind, especially when we think about social media and kids, and thinking all of the negative things that can happen. And so, but just to realize that social media in itself isn't bad or good. Social media also is hard a lot of times for us as adults to fully comprehend because it's come on so quickly, and it's not something we grew up with or even understood until recently. As you can see, starting way back in 2008, only 10% of the population said they used social media. Up into 2019, 79%, and this is in the United States, said they used it. I imagine with all of us social distancing and being at home, those numbers might even increase. People often ask, who are those like 21% of people who don't use it? And I would say that would be my grandmother, who still thinks when you email somebody, it's faxing. So remembering that, the majority of people use it. And there's a lot of different platforms we use. This was taken from last year in Millions, the most famous social network sites in the world. Facebook being number 1, YouTube number 2, and going down. But what I want to point out, while this is what's most popular overall, if we look at teenagers in the United States, and this was of last September, Instagram's the number 1, Snapchat's way high up there. I would imagine even if we took this poll again, TikTok would be a lot higher now for our students and our kids than it was even back in September. But what you see is people like me who are older, I use Facebook and Twitter mostly. I do Instagram, but not very well. Snapchat, honestly, the only reason I have Snapchat on my phone is for some of the funny filters that make my 6-year-old laugh when I'm needing to entertain him. So there's this disconnect for us as adults and a lot of time our kids, and even the language we use when we're talking about social media. And so as adults, we often want to start the conversation with our kids about the negative aspects of social media. You know, social and emotional aspects, cyberbullying and sexting. So for social emotional, we'll talk about our kids and how it can make them feel bad and how they compare themselves to a fictitious perfectionism. You know, you can have every filter in the world to make you look perfect, and that's not reality, but here I am sitting at home and I'm looking at those, and it can have a very negative impact on my self-esteem. And so a lot of times this is where we as adults, we want to say it's not good for you. It's not reality. We also know that there is threats of like cyberbullying is real. In one survey, 34% reported being cyberbullied. This is for our teens and kids. 15% admitted to being the one who cyberbullied, which I have to give them credit for admitting that. And we're seeing with cyberbullying, it's usually more of the girls than the boys. And so bullying has always been around. But cyberbullying, if we think about it, if I was bullied at school when I was a kid, when I went home, it stopped. Cyberbullying, it doesn't. It continues, and so you can't get away from it. Sexting is another important topic. A lot of times as adults, we don't want to talk about this or face the reality of how common it is. In an article in JMA Pediatrics, at least 1 in 4 teens said they had received sexually explicit texts and emails. 1 in 7 are sending them. More than 1 in 10 said that their sex had been forwarded without their consent, and about 1 in 12 had sent forward without consent. And so these are major issues, but how we talk about these things with our kids is what is important. And so a lot of times I hear parents say, I check their phones, I don't see anything, but did you know there's a whole market for apps that are to hide images and things kids don't want to see, to have their parents see? One of the big ones is a calculator. It looks like a calculator app on your phone. And so parents will often say, how do I know if it's real or not? So here's 2 different storage, when you go on your phone under storage. And on this one, you can see, this is my phone. Normal calculator app uses about 1.3 megabytes. And here is a not legitimate calculator app. It's actually a hidden storage, and it uses 183 megabytes. A calculator would never use that much data and that much space on your phone. And so that's one way that we see how they are used. But what I've noticed, we often talk and try to scare our kids regarding social media. And I don't know about you, but it doesn't really work, does it? I know when I was a kid, if my parents talked to me about certain subjects, they would want to scare me about it. But as kids, we were like, that's never going to happen to me. I'm not going to do that. So we start tuning out. And a lot of my thinking on this changed when I read this book called Social Media Wellness, Helping Tweens and Teens Thrive in an Unbalanced Digital World. And as I was reading it, a quote really struck me and stood out. I've come to realize that we're having the wrong conversations with our kids when it comes to social media and related technology. We can't ignore our tweens and teens' social media use. And we need to resist talking about social media and online use from a place of fear and misunderstanding. It really struck me of we are talking about this in the wrong way with our kids, and it's not working. One of my favorite examples about this is I have an older sister who's an attorney for a school district, and she often gets asked to talk about social media, have the attorney scare them into not using it inappropriately. And she got asked to talk to a group of cheerleaders because there had been a sudden thing of a lot of sexting going on. And so after she went to talk to them, she called me and she's like, Amy, you would not believe what happened. As I was talking to them, I was telling them like all the legal trouble you can get into from sexting. And she's like, they didn't care. She said, but then I told them, the guy can take that picture, make 10,000 copies, and distribute it to everyone, even a hard copy. And they were like, oh, that's really bad. She's like, I don't get why legal action didn't seem to scare them, but the other did. And I started going back and thinking developmentally and what happens with our brains as we develop. And around adolescence, you're not thinking long term, right? We think very short term when we're in adolescence, like what's impacting me immediately. So using these scare tactics, in 10 years you're never going to get a job because somebody's going to see that, it doesn't register. But the immediate consequence does. And so we have to sort of change the way we're talking. And that's where it does come into play of what is even happening developmentally for our adolescents with the use of social media. I like to look at the stages of psychosocial development by Erik Erikson. And adolescence is this time of identity versus role confusion. It is a time that our kids are really transitioning from childhood to adulthood, and they're wanting to become more independent and depending more on their friends and their social relationships and how they fit in. So the main question they're trying to ask is, who am I? And the most important thing to them are their relationships. And so if we keep that in mind with this digital world, we have to start understanding it instead of just criticizing it. I often ask, who taught our kids how to use social media? Nobody. They've had to figure it out on their own as we're figuring it out too. And we've not taught them. We're just very critical of how they do it. In the book, it talks about even when teens need their parents' support and guidance, they're less likely to seek it if they think their parent won't understand, particular with their online activity. So if you've never had an engaging conversation with your kid about social media, it's more of just don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. If they're struggling, they're not going to come to you because they're going to be afraid, I'm going to get in trouble, and they're going to say, I told you so. And so how do we have meaningful conversation? In the book, it talks about changing the conversation from fear into 3 categories: socialization, self-regulation, and safety. We can still talk about safety, but it's important the way in which we approach it. And something new hit me this year as I was asked to talk to middle school kids about their online use. And I was like, how do I engage with them? So we changed the discussion to intent versus impact. This happens in all areas of life, not just social media. We judge ourselves on intent, but we judge others on their impact. So I'm going to walk us through a few situations on those 3 categories: socialization, self-regulation, and safety, and how you can have this conversation with your kids. So under socialization, I don't know if some of you remember a few years ago, Harvard, it was this huge issue that Harvard revoked admission for several students because of things that were posted in a private Facebook group. So it was a group of students who had already been admitted, they weren't on campus yet, and they wanted to get to know each other. And that group was later discovered, and there was highly offensive things found in the group. So thinking about this, and you could ask your kids, you all could talk about this, like, what was the intent? The intent wasn't to be hurtful and to get the admission rescinded. Their intent was probably to make others laugh, to be part of a group. But their impact was that they offended a lot of people, and there were severe consequences. And in the end, did anybody care about their intent? They didn't. All they cared about was their impact. I actually listened to a podcast from one of the guys who was one of the students, and it was a wonderful, he didn't try to say he wasn't wrong. He very much owned up and took responsibility. But he also realized that because of one thing he did, he was now labeled as a horrible person, even though that's not who he was. And his impact was, not only did he not go to Harvard, he got denied to almost every school he applied to for a couple of years. And finally he was able to go to one. So this is an important way to talk about the difference between intent versus impact in regards to socialization. Under self-regulation, one is kids not getting enough sleep because of social media. It's very easy for us adults to be like, you should just go to sleep, but do we understand the intent behind it? So the intent for kids might be, my intent is to be involved, not to miss out, always be available. When in reality, the impact is they're stressed, anxiety can go up, not performing as well with schoolwork, relationships are declining, parents don't understand. So the impact is much different than the intent. So when we're having this discussion, it's important for us as parents to listen to the intent to understand better. We can still talk about that the impact are important and those are legitimate consequences, but are we willing to listen to the intent behind so we can better understand our kids and have more productive conversation on solutions? I would also say with self-regulation right now, we can have a lot of discussions around regulation, not just how much time I'm spending, but am I consuming a lot of news that is increasing my anxiety about everything going on? Or the fear that happens in a lot of social media right now around COVID-19. And so having that discussion about facts over fear in regards to regulation. Safety is an important one too. And so I like using this example, a 12-year-old from online use was then abducted and kidnapped. The story did have an ending where she was found again. But the intent was not, I'm going to be kidnapped. The intent was, am I lonely? Do I want to be liked, feel wanted? Even though then my impact was that I was kidnapped and abused. And I found, even with middle school students, changing the discussion from don't do it, like you shouldn't be online, or all these horrible things can happen, if going through some scenarios of intent versus impact. Because when we tell a kid, well, don't send certain type of pictures because you're not going to get a job later, that doesn't register. But if we slow down and talk about intent behind it, we all start understanding better. For parents and for students, here's a list of different resources, and these slides will be posted later tonight or tomorrow. So here's just a list of NetSmart is a great online tool to use, the Cyberbullying Resource Center, just different ways for you to get more information so you can have a better discussion. And if you don't understand certain apps your kids are using or why they like being on it, ask them. And in the same way, when I talk to the middle school students about intent versus impact, it's not all negative. There are ways that our intent can be really good and that can result in huge impact. If we think about the wonderful ways social media can be used and the way we are staying connected now when otherwise we would not be able to connect with others. And I want to give you an opportunity that you as a family can use social media in a positive way this Saturday. It is our Round Rock ISD virtual campus walk. This walk started 2 years ago by our student advisory board because they were concerned about the mental health of their peers and they wanted adults to take notice and to also care. So this walk was started by students. It continues today thanks to the School Health Advisory Committee, our SHAC, and this year Round Rock Council of PTAs has joined us in helping to plan and to implement this. It is virtual this year since we have to keep social distance. So you can go online at afsp.org/RoundRockISD to register. It's completely free. And then on the day of the walk, on this Saturday, if you go to the Facebook page for AFSP Central Texas, we will have a lot of different videos being posted. One special guest video will be Representative Talarico, who is a Round Rock ISD graduate. And use the hashtag HopeWalksInRoundRock. And parents, if you're not sure about hashtags, ask your kids about it. They'll know about hashtags. So on any social media platform of your choice, and we'll be monitoring those and being able to repost and show different ways that we're spreading hope across Round Rock during this time and thinking of ways we can really be impactful and help others as we're keeping our social distance. And with that, we're also thankful for our sponsor, Rock Springs Changes, which is an intensive outpatient for adolescents in mental health. Thank you for joining in. If you have questions at this time, we will answer any of those. If you have those in the comments, you're also welcome. Like I said, my email address is there or on Twitter. My husband's helping me, so I'm going to see if he said if there was any questions. There's no questions. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have other topics you want us to cover, we're going to be doing this every week, 2 times in one day, so for different people when it is most convenient for them. All of these resources are also housed if you go to the Round Rock ISD website, roundrockisd.org, and then at the top it'll say Behavioral Health Support Library. If you click on that, all of these resources have been digitized, and there's a lot of other great information for you so that you make sure you have all that you need. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you again next week.